You're watching and listening to the Electronic Intifada live stream. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman with my colleague Ali Abunimah. On Tuesday, the European Union decided not to suspend its association agreement with Israel. 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐫𝐿, the Secretary General of Amnesty International, accused Brussels of a, quote, cruel and unlawful betrayal of the European Union's supposed commitment to international law, of its own rules, and of the human rights of Palestinians. 𝐄𝐫𝐿 added European leaders had the opportunity to take a principled stand against Israel's crimes, but instead gave it a green light to continue its genocide in Gaza, its unlawful occupation of the whole occupied Palestinian territory, and its system of apartheid against Palestinians. Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar hailed the inaction by EU member states as a, quote, diplomatic victory for Tel Aviv. The EU-Israel Association Agreement provides Israel with enormous trade benefits and other privileges, but its implementation is supposed to hinge on Israel's respect for human rights. Last month, the EU completed a long-awaited review of the agreement and concluded that Israel is in violation of the Human Rights Clause. Tuesday's meeting of the EU Foreign Affairs Council would have been the opportunity to suspend the agreement and impose sanctions. But instead, Kaja Kallas, the EU's foreign minister, said that Brussels has entered into a voluntary agreement with Israel, in which Israel, which is openly, deliberately starving Palestinians in Gaza, agreed to allow more humanitarian aid in. It's an agreement that comes with no enforcement mechanism whatsoever. The next opportunity for the EU to take any concrete action would be at its Foreign Affairs Council meeting in October. In the 3 months until then, thousands more Palestinians are certain to be murdered by Israel. Joining us now to discuss these developments is our very own colleague, Electronic Intifada Associate Editor, David Cronin. He's an expert on EU-Israel relations. His most recent article is called German Aristocrats Backed Hitler. Now they support Israel. It focuses on two prominent EU officials, and we'll talk to him about that as well. Welcome to the live stream, Dave.
Thanks very much, Nora.
So prior to Tuesday's EU Foreign Affairs Council meeting, it was reported that Kaja Kallas, the EU's foreign minister, was set to offer member states 10 possible measures to hold Israel accountable. The options included suspending the whole association agreement, banning trade with settlements, ending visa-free travel to the EU for Israelis, and denying Israel access to other EU benefits. Were you surprised that in the end the EU decided to do absolutely nothing? And what do you think happened? Who's blocking the sanctions here? Or what? What is blocking the sanctions?
I'll deal with the first question first, if that's okay, Nora.
Yeah.
To be perfectly honest with you, I wasn't in the least bit surprised. The European Union has been pretty consistent, appallingly consistent throughout this genocide. In October 2023, when the genocide was already underway, the European Union's governments, all 27 of them, collectively issued a statement presenting Israel's genocidal war as defensive. Since then, the European Union has continued pretty much on a business as usual way in terms of its relations with Israel. One document drawn up by European Union officials earlier this year even celebrated what it called the richness and vitality of the relations between the European Union and Israel. During the month of May, there was admittedly some ground for hope. 17 of the EU's 27 governments decided then to request a review of the association agreement that you mentioned, the main contractual basis of relations between the European Union and Israel. That review concluded in very timid language that there were indications that Israel was breaching the agreement. I should say that Article 2 of that agreement makes it abundantly clear that all relations between the European Union and Israel are based on, or should be based on, respect for fundamental human rights. Despite now, that was in May. Since then, a couple of things have happened. Israel, first of all, attacked Iran, and the European Union collectively sided with Israel in that attack, despite how, or perhaps because of how it involved the crime of aggression, a very serious crime that has been recognized since the time of the Nuremberg trials following the Second World War. More recently, as you mentioned, just last week, the Kaja Kallas announced, Kaja Kallas being the European Union's foreign policy chief, announced that she had reached an agreement with Israel on increasing the amount of humanitarian aid into Israel, into Gaza, and this was presented as a major breakthrough. The details of this agreement have not been actually published, so we don't know exactly how much aid is involved. But this kind of did change the dynamic, and it did allow Israel to buy very valuable time and to continue its genocide without any fear of being held accountable by the European Union. You asked who's blocking this? Perhaps it's best to focus on the biggest obstacle to any action by the European Union. The name of that obstacle is Germany. Germany, of course, is the most populous country in the European Union and the most powerful country economically in the European Union. Of course, it's a country where a Holocaust, well, it's a country that carried out a Holocaust in the last century and is now actively supporting a Holocaust against the Palestinian people to try and atone for that horrible Holocaust in the 20th century. It is now fully supporting a Holocaust against the Palestinian people in the 21st. We should be very clear about this. The two key enablers of the Gaza genocide are the United States and Germany. 99% of all weapons sales to Israel before the genocide got underway came from the United States and Germany. Germany has continued selling weapons to Israel during the genocide. The relatively new chancellor in Berlin, Friedrich Merz, not so long ago, celebrated the friendship between Germany and Israel as a great treasure. This is how Germany regards its relations with Israel. Germany, when Angela Merkel was the chancellor, actually declared that defending Israel is Staatsräson. That's normally translated as reason of state or a fundamental duty for Germany. Germany is absolutely determined, it appears, to prevent any collective European Union action against Israel.
Yeah. Thank you, David. In your latest article, you write that, quote, rather than sticking to her actual job as the European Union's coordinator for combating anti-Semitism, Katharina von Schnörbein is defending the Holocaust which Israel is inflicting in Gaza. And last week, the EU Observer, which is a publication that focuses on what happens in Brussels, EU Observer published some revelations about von Schnörbein's activities. Now, as a result of those revelations, members of the European Parliament are calling on von Schnörbein to resign. What did EU observer reveal, and I know that you've reported for the Electronic Intifada for many years very closely on Katrina von Schnurbein, often digging things up with freedom of information requests that she doesn't want made public. But tell us what the EU observer uh, found out that we didn't know. And do you think she played a role? You've mentioned the overwhelming role of Germany, but do you think she might have played a role in staving off sanctions for Israel at this point?
Sure. Katharina von Schnurbein is a Bavarian aristocrat who was appointed to be the European Union's coordinator for combating anti-Semitism in December 2015. I managed to get hold of the job description, essentially her contract. There's not one mention of Israel in that document. Her job is supposed to be restricted to defending Jews within Europe from bigotry and hostility. However, she has, throughout the decade in which, almost a decade now, in which she has held her post, acted essentially as an agent for Israel. I'm not alleging that she's being paid by Israel, but she is nonetheless fighting Israel's corner and giving every indication that she is essentially
Well,
an
it's worse
agent
because
for Israel
it's
in
worse.
the Brussels bureaucracy.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you, but it's worse because she is acting as an agent for Israel, and Israel doesn't have to pay for it. EU taxpayers are paying for it.
Sure. Yep. That's I see what you mean.
Yeah.
The article the excellent article that you mentioned, published by the EU Observer website, showed it was based on a trip that Katharina von Schnurbein undertook quite recently to Tel Aviv, during which she met senior figures in the Israeli government, including the aforementioned Gideon Sa'ar, the Israeli foreign minister, if I'm not mistaken. But the EU Observer got hold of a report of a meeting that Katharina von Schnurbein held with various European diplomats, and in that meeting, she made quite extraordinary claims. These included her allegation that there are new forms of anti-Semitism, such as what she described as ambient anti-Semitism. The example that she gave of ambient anti-Semitism was a bake sale organized by some of her colleagues in the Brussels bureaucracy to raise money for a Gaza appeal by the Irish Red Cross. Somehow, this altruistic charity event was an example of ambient anti-Semitism in the mind of Katharina von Schnurbein. The European Union officially wants to encourage innovation, and perhaps Katharina von Schnurbein has gone beyond innovation here by actually imagining something that doesn't really exist at all. But we have to say that this is not uncharacteristic of Katharina von Schnurbein. She has been making fake allegations of anti-Semitism for many years. She has been alleging that the Palestinian-led boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement is motivated by hostility to Jews. Just recently, she also, I should add, she also alleged that the concerns raised by 17 European Union governments, the 17 European Union governments who requested a review of relations with Israel, those concerns were not based on facts, but they were based on, according to her, on rumors about Jews. Katharina von Sturbein just recently has been trying to ban or restrict use of such slogans as the very famous slogan, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free." She argues that this is a call for annihilation of the people living in the current state of Israel, even though it's clearly the opposite. It's actually a clear call for justice and equality throughout the historic land of Palestine. So, yes, clearly, as I mentioned, Katharina von Sturbein has quite a restricted mandate. She's not supposed to deal with questions relating to the Middle East at all, and has actually admitted herself that she doesn't have any mandate to deal. On occasion, she's admitted that she doesn't have any mandate at all to deal with the Middle East. Yet clearly, in this case, she has been meddling in foreign policy discussion, something that she has no responsibility for. As you mentioned, Ali, some members, I think it was 25 or 26 members of the European Parliament, have called for her to resign. Unfortunately, Katharina von Sturbein enjoys quite high-level support in the Brussels bureaucracy. It would appear that she's supported from the top. Her fellow German aristocrat Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the European Commission, appears to be a supporter of Katharina von Sturbein and committed to the same agenda of weaponizing anti-Semitism. A little notice move by Ursula von der Leyen when she took up her second term as the European Commission president was to actually poach Katharina von Sturbein. By that I mean Katharina von Sturbein used to work in the Justice Department of the European Commission, but she now actually works in what's called the Secretariat General, the core administration of the Brussels bureaucracy, which is headed politically and overseen politically by Ursula von der Leyen herself. So Ursula von der Leyen is now the direct boss of Katharina von Sturbein, which appears to indicate that she's fully on board with this agenda of weaponizing anti-Semitism and smearing the Palestine solidarity movement.
Yeah, and of course, the citizens of Europe have absolutely no say or control over any of this, no accountability. She's been in that role for 10 years and doesn't come up for review. There's no vote on her staying in that role. Not even the European Parliament has a say in it. So it really just shows how undemocratic the EU is. And of course, as you mentioned, she's played a role in a direct role meddling on behalf of Israel, openly and behind closed doors. And recently, she also disseminated, just a week or so ago, the revived October 7th rape hoax that Asa Winstanley and I debunked on last week's show. So she's also actively spreading atrocity propaganda that aids and abets and justifies or seeks to justify Israel's genocide. So she is doing the very things to Palestinians that she claims Jews need protection from incitement, spewing racial and ethnic and genocidal hatred, and all of this paid for by the European Union.
Absolutely. I just add that she's not alone in supporting and abetting genocide. 𝐤𝐿 𝐄𝐿, who was mentioned earlier, the European Union's foreign policy chief, said earlier this week that the aim of the European Union is not to punish Israel. Now, we have to bear in mind, Ali, that under international law, under the United Nations Genocide Convention, there is an obligation on governments and governmental bodies around the world to punish the crime of genocide, the crime of crimes, as it's often described. Article 1 of that convention, so the very beginning, pretty much the very beginning of that convention, actually says that governments around the world have an obligation to prevent and punish the crime of genocide. So when 𝐤𝐿 𝐄𝐿 is saying that the aim is not to punish Israel, what she's really doing is allowing a genocide to continue and abetting the crime of genocide. And she should, along with other figures such as Katharina von Schnurbein and Ursula von der Leyen, who told Benjamin Netanyahu in October 2023 that he could count on the European Union support. These figures are abetting a genocide, and they should be held accountable for doing so.
And I'll just note too that 𝐤𝐿 𝐄𝐿, who you just mentioned, who said the aim is not to punish Israel, vocally, sometimes several times a day, talks about how important it is to punish Russia. So it's not that she's against.
How many sanctions packages has the EU?
I think there are
issued?
18. They've
18,
passed 18 sanctions packages against Russia. So she's not against punishment of countries in general. She's not in favor of dialogue and voluntary agreements with perpetrators of international crimes or countries she accuses of that. In general, it's only Israel that she wants to protect from punishment and accountability. I think we have time for one more quick question, Nora.
Yeah, I mean, Dave, you not only look at the goings on of what's happening at the highest levels of the EU leadership bodies, but you also have a very keen eye tuned to what civil society, which is being ruled by these genocidal maniacs, is doing to pressure their governments. What can you say about kind of popular pressure on the EU by grassroots popular movements in places like Ireland and Spain, for example?
Yeah, Ireland, Spain, and Slovenia, I think, were the first countries in the European Union to actually use the word genocide. Okay, they dragged their heels, but they eventually, in the last few months, have described the situation in Gaza as a genocide, and that obviously, now that they have acknowledged that genocide is going on, there's an onus on them to act. And the action that they have taken has, of course, been the result of popular pressure. In Ireland, my own country, the government is finally doing something. It is finally bringing forward legislation to ban goods from Israel's settlements in the occupied West Bank and the Golan Heights of Syria. Excuse me. This is something that the Irish government has dragged its heels on doing. An earlier and actually better, stronger version of this legislation was actually approved by both houses in the Oireachtas, the Irish Parliament, some time ago, but the government decided to block its implementation using the spurious argument that their hands were tied by the European Union. I'm happy to see that the Irish government, although they have diluted this legislation, they do seem to be committed to introducing a ban on goods from Israel's settlements, and they do seem to be standing up to such pressure as the statement issued by a man called Mike Huckabee this week. Mike Huckabee being the current United States ambassador to Israel. Mike Huckabee alleged that the Irish have fallen into a vat of Guinness by introducing this legislation, and expressed hope that the Irish will sober up. Needless to say, that is quite a racist stereotype of the Irish. I personally haven't had a drink in over 20 years now. For the information of Mr. Huckabee, if he is listening. But anyway, despite the fact that I should say that despite the fact that I'm a proud Irishman, I'm not. And despite the fact that I'm relieved that the Irish government is finally doing something, I'm not prepared to praise the Irish government in any way. They are still using a similar excuse to avoid taking other forms of action against Israel. The Irish Central Bank in Dublin hosts the sale of Israeli bonds throughout the European Union. These bonds used to be sold by Britain, but because of Brexit, because Britain has decided to leave the European Union, it has moved the sale of these bonds. Israel has moved the sale of these bonds from London to Dublin, and there's been a lot of pressure from the Palestine solidarity movement to end the sale of these bonds, which is to say that Israel itself has actually admitted that these bonds are helping to finance its war effort against Gaza. So in other words, these bonds are actually being sold in Dublin and are helping to finance a genocide which the Irish government disapproves of. The Irish government is claiming that its legal advice says that it is obligated under European Union law to allow the sale of these bonds to continue. It has not published the legal advice in question, so we don't know exactly what the advice entails. But I don't trust the Irish government anyway. I think it's quite disgraceful that the Irish government. I think it's obviously hypocritical. It's flagrantly hypocritical that the Irish government, on the one hand, is prepared, after dragging its heels, to eventually call Israel's actions in Gaza a genocide, yet is also prepared to allow the sale of bonds which are financing this genocide. The Irish government needs to act right now and end this disgraceful contribution it is making to a genocide. And hopefully others will follow suit.
Yeah. No kidding.
If Ireland takes action.
Yeah. I mean, that's it. All it could take is one state to kind of get the domino effect rolling. Well, thank you so much, Dave. That is David Cronin. He is our colleague, associate editor at the Electronic Intifada. Your latest news post is called "German Aristocrats Backed Hitler. Now They Support Israel." And that is, of course, up right now on electronicintifada.net. David, thank you so much for all
Thanks
that
very
you
much.
do. And it's always, always great to have you in front of the camera this time on the live stream. Thanks, Dave.
Thanks a lot.